Friends, last week we took a quick look at the first ever SUV that has two electric motors driving two separate axles that is a full plug-in hybrid vehicle. Now let's go back to the XC90, but spend a little bit more time looking at the car and the platform itself. And this time let's look at the turbocharged and supercharged T6. So to really unpack the engine, we need to step back and talk theory. So Volvo has taken the decision to go with all four-cylinder engines. Now there's a lot of moving parts to a decision like that. There's the very obvious one of, hey, we're trying to get more efficiency, but still maintaining the power of a larger engine. And then there's complexity. Like if you look at the previous Volvo engine family, it used to be 5 engines. There was 2 each of 4 cylinders and 2 each of 5 cylinders, and then there was a V8 at the top. Now they've structured that down to 2 engines. But if I'm really reading between the lines here, one of the biggest benefits is packaging. Think about it, if you have a smaller power plant to package, that gives you a lot more really flexibility in form. So like, take a look at the front of this car, and you guys know I'm a frustrated designer. This is a production car, but the front end has the proportions of a concept car. That's one of the major benefits of making this smaller. Anyway, I digress. So let's talk about this engine. So this is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, puts out 316 horsepower, and then it's 295 pound-feet of torque. Now you're probably asking yourself, how do you get 316 horsepower out of a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine? Well, you could easily slap a turbocharger or two to this engine. Well, Volvo decided not to do that. They got a new guy running the engine group, and they decided to go with a turbocharger and a supercharger. But how does that work? Well, that's all a function of what the driver is asking for in terms of torque, or really the load under acceleration. So let's say for the sake of discussion, there's a light acceleration load. The engine will operate as if normally aspirated and then hand off to the turbocharger. But then let's say, hey, I'm a New Yorker, I'm gonna stick my foot into it, I want more power. Well, that's when the supercharger is going to kick in first. And then from there, the supercharger hands over to the turbocharger. Now, why does it do that? Well, that's efficiency. The supercharger, like any old school supercharger that you saw on like cars with superchargers sticking out of the hood, it's mechanical. It still takes load off of the accessory drive. Yeah, there's a clutch that can turn it on and off, but it still takes load off the accessory drive when it's in use. So it gives you that extra power that you need, or really the torque that you need, and then it hands off to the turbocharger, because think about it, the turbocharger is using the spent exhaust gas, thus more efficient. Get it? So an all 4-cylinder engine strategy, that's a pretty bold move, but it's not the first time that we've seen this. If you remember back to 2010, when we first drove the then new 2011 Sonata, they did an all 4-cylinder strategy, but that's a totally different segment. That is an affordable D-segment family car. This, yes, a family car or SUV, but this is a luxury car. So even people that are not car people, they're gonna want performance from their XC90. So the question is, do you still have engine performance? Like, is this thing got enough power? And now I've been driving this thing, I want to say almost 2 days out here in the canyons, and there really hasn't been an instance where I have wanted more power. The turbocharger working in conjunction with the supercharger, really plenty of power. There's never an instance where it's like peaky, where it gets to a point where it's an on or off switch like old school turbos. It's very much a wide power band. With that said, it doesn't have quite the refinement of a V6 or an inline 6, or definitely not that of a V8. So is that a problem? Well, if this had a porcelain roundel on the hood, I'd say, yeah, that's definitely a problem. But Volvos, they go after a different customer. So I would say this is actually more powerful and exceeds the expectations of most people that are buying Volvos. So in the T8 episode, we covered the suspension a bit, but just to recap, there are two suspensions on offer. There's a steel spring setup that has a very cool transverse leaf spring in the rear here, much like a Corvette. And then there is an air suspension that's on offer. It's fitted to this one here, and every T8 that comes to the US will have the air suspension. It basically does two things. It adjusts the ride height, but it also adjusts the dampers. And it does that through the drive mode system. Now the drive mode system does adjust more than the suspension. It adjusts the throttle mapping, transmission mapping, but in the case of the dampers, it stiffens up the dampers, so it drastically changes the driving dynamics of the car, and we'll get to that later. There's another trick in the off-road mode. It brings the height up by 2 inches, but when the car then goes to 20 miles an hour or above, it brings it back down to a normal ride height. And speaking of height, there's another trick here, and you know, I've never told you guys, but sometimes I have the mentality of a 3-year-old, and I love toys like this. And I could only imagine, like the kids of the parents that buy these things, my guess is they'd probably play with this thing to the point of breaking it. Okay, let's fiddle with this air suspension, and we do that by adjusting the drive modes using this beautifully knurled drive mode button here. And we are currently in comfort mode, and Volvo bills it everyday use. And I would completely agree with that. Granted, we are not in an everyday application right now, being in canyons, but it really demonstrates that in this mode you do get a bit of understeer. It's not the most confidence-inspiring mode, but then again, I don't really see the average family buying this car coming out and carving canyons. Okay, let's step down one level and go to the eco mode, which Volvo calls the efficient drive mode. And basically what this does, it adjusts the throttle, becomes a bit softer. It changes the throttle mapping, the transmission mapping, and obviously the suspension a bit. And really, the engine is focused more on efficiency than it is performance, even from the normal mode. So really it's trying to avoid using that supercharger. There is, if you notice here, an off-road mode, but notice it's grayed out like in a computer, like it wouldn't be available, and that's because we're going over 20 miles an hour. So to engage that, you need to be going below 20 miles an hour, and then it brings the suspension up 2 inches. Okay, now that we've covered all the compulsory modes for the tree huggers of the audience, I say we have some fun, and let's go to the dynamic mode. The dynamic mode, once again, changes the throttle mapping, the transmission mapping, but most importantly changes the dampers. So it completely stiffens up the dampers. The throttle, totally different. It's a little stiffer throttle, but much more responsive. And notice the driving dynamics around corners, the car doesn't lean as much. There isn't much body roll in the rear at all. It's like a totally different vehicle. Like this is where you feel like you got a 6-cylinder, almost even an 8-cylinder in some cases. It's just plenty of power. Notice we got a nice declining radius turn coming up here. I'm going to slow down going into it and see how composed this is. This is a 2.5-ton vehicle, people, and we're going around a turn. I'm not going to tell you the speed, but not what we should be doing in a vehicle like this. So now let's press on to suspension and architecture. So up front, we've got a short, long arm, basically double wishbone setup, and in the rear, you got a multi-link suspension. Now, the real interesting thing about this is the product architecture. So do you guys remember when we did that Audi Volkswagen MQB episode with Nick Uhas, and we learned about how Volkswagen's going to be building a number of different cars off of the same vehicle architecture? Well, Volvo is looking to do the same thing here. They're calling it Scalable Product Architecture, or SPA. Sounds a little bit better than MQB. And the logic is really the same. Take like hard points, shared hard points of cars, or even tools like suspension underpinnings, sub-assemblies, things like that. Share them amongst different cars in different segments, different sizes, to be able to kind of spread the development cost over multiple cars. But here's really the interesting note. I was having dinner with one of the engineers last night, and he was saying that this 2015, and this is going to be a 2016 model year car. He was saying that this is going to be the oldest car in the Volvo lineup in 2018, when it's 3 years old. Okay, let's focus on the interior, and the place to start is the seats. So if we go back to like old school Volvos, I don't mean like 1927, I mean like 240 DLs, the seats, they were very specific. They had a function and they worked very well. But Volvo decided to go with a clean sheet of paper here, and they hired orthopedists from university hospitals to look at their seats. And the orthopedists came up with two suggestions. Number one, make the seat padding a bit thinner. And number two, and most importantly, the seat back to make it the same shape as the spine. The result definitely works. Then there's a couple of other bits. You can now adjust the length of the seat bottom with this handy dandy thigh support here. And then speaking of 240 DLs, remember the old headrests and those things? I'd love to see the throwback here, just modernized. And then, you know, the kids today, they like wearing brands all over their clothes and their hats. Well, that is now old school, because what you need is the flag of an entire country hanging off the seat of your car. Let's press on to the back. And then there's the business end, and that is 5 seats in the rear. There are 3 in the second row, 2 in the third row. And I'd like to point out the width of the seats in the third row are the same width as the outboard seats in the second row. But really the second row is pretty flash. It's got a couple things going on. Number one, it's got this like baby booster seat thing here that Volvo's been doing for like 25 years. And then each one of these seats, they move forward and backward on a track, and it creates something that I don't know if Volvo intended. Think you've got the child mouthing off here, you got mommy here, you have your very own mobile gulag. But then there's another trick that they've got here, in that all of these seats, meaning all 5, not just the ones in the second row, fold flat. And then in this case, the headrest folds before it actually folds all the way down, so you don't have to pull the headrest out. And then from the tailgate all the way to the now thinner seat backs, you have a completely flat load floor. And also, I really gotta point out here, the coloring on this specific T6 is stunning. Might have something to do with the fact that my mother's first diesel Volvo was the same coloring, so I'm kind of biased. But there is something that this one has that my mother's diesel Volvo did not have. Let's check that out back there. So you know how I'm always going on about the Burmester stereos in the Porsches and the Mercedes and the Bang & Olufsen in the Audis? Well, here we are going on about S-Classes again. But basically, Burmester, they fit the subwoofer to the firewall of the S-Class, thus making the entire car the subwoofer. Well, Volvo and Bowers and Wilkins, they kind of do the same thing here. They also have very cool speaker grills, almost as cool as the S-Class, but I digress. Basically, they fit another one of these open air type subwoofers, but it's above and behind the left rear wheel well, also above the rear battery. And it has the same effect of making the entire car the subwoofer. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, you are a hipster parent, you can listen and enjoy the multi-talented Saint Bose, or after you drop the Rugrats off, you can rock out with, well, you know what I'm talking about. So a couple more points about the interior. Overall, this is a stunning place to be. Like, take a look at some of the more like unusual details. The mirror, the rear view mirror, is literally all the way to the edge. The start-stop switch, it's not a button. You literally rotate it to start the car. The wood, I mean, it's what can I say? It's like Scandinavian furniture. I know that's cliche, but look at it. And it's matte finish, so it really drives home the point of refinement. Even the speaker grills, like the Mercedes, I would take these off this car and put them on my wall as art. But notice when you look further into the speaker grills, the actual speaker cone itself is yellow. Yellow. And then, of course, there's this screen setup they've got here. And there's actually 3, not just this. So we've got a TFT screen here, we've got a head-up display here, and then we've got like this iPad-esque thing here. So let's start over here. So the logic is the most important stuff, like the stuff you need to see, like speed, speed limit, turn-by-turn directions, head-up display. Then you've got the TFT screen, which kind of repeats some of the map in the center between the tachometer and the speedometer, but there's also like settings for the dynamics, trip computer, that kind of stuff, so secondary information. Then this over here, the logic is all entertainment. They're not even calling it infotainment, they're calling it entertainment, and that's kind of the way it's set up in this portrait mode, which I gotta tell you, if you were to describe portrait mode to me in a car, I'd say, that would look kind of stupid in a dash, but really, this thing, exquisite, and it's all touch. Like literally, I can pinch and zoom this map, and notice it actually works very quickly. Like, we've played around with this in the Cadillac Q, that can pinch and zoom, but it's so slow in that application. Notice how fast I'm doing it here. And then you've got a main menu button down here, just like you would have on like an Android or an iPad. But then they're doing something very unique here. And let's say if I hit the automatic climate control, or I hit the temperature over here, notice it pops up with more functions. And the logic is, that's where you can configure the car. Like if I want to adjust the temperature here, I can close that, or if I want to adjust the fan, go back to the main menu. But this is where you'll see Apple CarPlay coming up. The CarPlay will come up from the bottom and not take up the entire screen, so you'll have some of the Volvo functionality within the same screen. And then you come back to this main screen and notice it's a summary of all the applications you have running. So you've got navigation, you got media, the phone, and then there's a sound experience. Oh, I almost forgot. This one in the Bowers & Wilkins setup, they went to the Gothenburg concert hall. They measured or did a study of the Gothenburg concert hall, and you have that as a preset to listen to your music. But anyway, I digress. You can swipe the screen side to side from any one of the apps, and one side, if I swipe to the right, then coming up with the, I guess, the left screen, you can change some of the functionality of the car. Like I can turn the auto stop start on, adjust the mode of the traction control, turn on some of the safety stuff. I can even fold the headrests in the back. Wow, check that out. But then I can swipe back to the regular main menu, or I can go over to the application menu, and this gives me more choices for each one of the applications. So for example, you want to set up the Bluetooth, you want to change the sound setting, like go to that Gothenburg concert hall thing. There's even car status here, so I can get messages from the car, basically, oh, you know, the tire pressure's low, that kind of stuff. And then of course I can always go back to the main menu with this. Overall, this is an experience you know very well if you have a tablet. This is just probably the best, I would say, automotive application of taking the use case of a tablet and putting it into a car. I am going to say this, I am very excited to try CarPlay in this Volvo. Now, have you guys seen our Apple CarPlay episodes with the Ferrari and the Hyundai? I gotta say, after seeing this, I'm very intrigued to try Apple CarPlay in this thing, because remember, this is one of the launch customers for CarPlay, Volvo, Mercedes, and Ferrari. With the hardware set up like this in portrait and that kind of a speed of whatever processor they're using, I gotta believe this is gonna be interesting. So we'll come back to you with an Apple CarPlay episode that's focusing just on CarPlay in this car. That I am excited for. Pop quiz! When I say safety, what is the first car brand that comes into your mind? I thought so. Now, this XC90 is really no exception to that. Actually, it is. There is the usual, like, soup of letters that translate to safety gizmos in here. But really, what's going on here is the targets that Volvo is going to in the next couple of years. There's way more than what we can cover in this episode. Maybe we'll get the car back and do just a safety episode. But I do want to point out one thing. When I got into the T8 yesterday for the first time, granted, the first thing you notice in these things is the level of refinement. But the second thing you notice is look at the mirror. Look at where it is and its size. And this is the kind of stuff you don't normally notice. Like in most cars, the mirrors are like in the armpit of the A-pillar. Here, they've moved it back and they've increased the size. So even if you're not a car guy, you would get in here and notice this thing because the mirror is so much bigger, which improves your visibility, which improves guess what? So you see how this whole Volvo circle of life thing continues? So in summary, what do we got? Well, friends, nothing short of the second coming of Volvo. I have completely admitted to you in the first of these 3 Volvo episodes that I grew up on Volvo, so I am a little bit biased, but it's been a while since Volvo has given us a totally new car, and I would argue that all of the people behind Volvo have taken this charge incredibly seriously and over-delivered here. And yeah, you expected the interior to be somewhat nice. You expected the safety, but really what we didn't expect is the incredible levels of refinement. I know I'm repeating that from the T8 episode, but then there's also the little detail bits here, there, and everywhere that just make this thing way more than the sum of its parts. Now with that, I want to leave you guys with a question. And of course it's going to be about which one you would buy, but think about this for a minute. This car was very important in its segment like 10 years ago. Volvo has sold north of 600,000 of these things worldwide, 250,000 of these things in the US. So this is not an inconsequential car, especially when you consider it's north of $50,000. Volumes of cars drop in half when you go over 40, so when they're selling 250 around the world in its lifespan, that's a lot. So with that in mind, if I were to give you a choice between the new Volvo XC90, the question does not apply to the T8, the new Volvo T6 against its intended competitors, the Mercedes-Benz GL450 and the BMW X5 which one would you choose? Why would you choose it? And also let me know what you're doing with it. Like, do you have kids? Do you not have kids and you just want to have the dog in the back? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, Motoman TV, all one word, Motoman TV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I think this is the end of our 3 Volvo series thing here. So I say until next time, hey, hey. So here's the script. Click here to subscribe, click here to watch one of our 350 other episodes, and most importantly, share us with your friends. You're only wasting half your life on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Motoman TV, all one word. I don't care who you share us with. Share us with your enemies. Just give the gift of Motoman.